Today on PI Perspectives, we have retired FBI agent Jim Casey. Jim talks about his transition from a high-profile government position to a self-employed private investigator. We talk about the struggles you can face and how to avoid the pitfalls. Jim brings some great insight and stories about some of the high-profile cases he's worked on, both in and out of the government. This episode is brought to you by Crosstrack's case management software. Crosstrack integrates with programs you already use like QuickBooks, DelvePoint, ScopeNow, Investigation Video Editor, Word, and more. The integrations combined with powerful features such as automated audio transcription and report generation help investigators generate revenue and improve efficiency. The system can be customized for any investigative specialty, so start your free trial today at crosstracks.co and use promo code PIP20. Now let's join the guys and jump into Jim Casey's unique perspective. Here's your host, Private Investigator Matt Spare.
And welcome everybody to the next episode of PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spare, your host. Today we have a real treat for you guys. We are joined by Jim Casey, a retired FBI agent. Jim's got 25 years experience in the FBI, about 32 years in the investigative field or policing field, and he has since transitioned into the private sector. So we are going to talk today about Jim's career a little bit, but we're also going to talk more importantly about that transition of leaving the federal government or law enforcement and going into the private sector and becoming a private investigator. So, Jim, I want to welcome you to the program. How are you doing today?
Hey, great. Thanks, Matt, for the opportunity.
Yeah, so thanks for being here today. Hey, we're all in the middle of the shutdown, the stay at home. So what's your day look like these days?
So it's really interesting because we kind of, I've been with a security firm for about 3 years, which focused primarily on manned security, guards, armed guards, unarmed guards, federal contracts. And we've spun off an operation recently where we're really going to what I think is my forte, which is the private investigations, crisis management, cyber, due diligence, things like that. And interestingly enough, we decided to make this move about 6 weeks ago. So I've spent about the last 6 weeks kind of building out the new part of the business. It's something I've done before. I did it back in 2012, 2013. And so I'm kind of reconstituting that and spending my day doing, the back office type things to get that business back up.
Yeah, well, when you're stay at home, I guess you have the extra time to do that, right?
Correct.
Shelter in place.
Yep.
We're all finding new and interesting ways to spend our time, but it definitely has been a challenge. I'm up here in New York, and I believe you're in Florida, correct?
Correct, North Florida.
Right. Okay. Tell me a little bit about your background. I had mentioned that you started off as a police officer, so walk me through how you transitioned that into a federal position.
Sure. So 1981, fresh out of college, I literally had an appointment to the Arlington County, Virginia Police Department a month before I before I graduated. A week after graduation, I was in the police academy. 3 months later, I was driving around the streets of Arlington County, driving a patrol car, and 22 years old, badge on my chest, gun on my hip, and basically protecting the citizens of Arlington County. I learned a heck of a lot in about 5 years, mostly in patrol, evening and midnight shifts. I applied to the feds like a lot of people in the Northern Virginia area did, Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria PDs. We were kind of a breeding ground for the federal agencies. Right. Had a application process with the Bureau in process, and they notified me that there was a hiring freeze for whatever reason, suspended my application. I got picked up by diplomatic security, went there for 2 years. The FBI called me back and said, we reconstituted the program. If you want to come back, all you have to do is a couple little steps and, you're welcome into the program. And I did. So 1987, I transitioned from diplomatic security over to the Bureau, went to Quantico, my third academy in 5 years? Right. 6 years, and then became an FBI agent. Wow. Went to Detroit for 9 years, got in the management track, and did that for the next 25 years.
Right. You were not only in Detroit, you bounced around to a couple different locations, right?
Yeah, Detroit for, like I said, almost 9 years. I mostly did violent crime in Detroit, which was a big deal back in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. I was back at headquarters in the counterterrorism section, went to Indianapolis as a squad supervisor, Cincinnati as an assistant special agent in charge. Back to the National Security Council was a fabulous assignment, sort of a graduate school education and the way the executive branch works. I did that for 2 years. And then eventually I was fortunate enough to be the special agent in charge of the FBI's Jacksonville division.
Right.
And I retired from there.
Nice. So, I mean, it was kind of an interesting time for you to be there. And we're going to talk about your career there later on in the program, and some of the things you got involved in. But what I'm interested about is, the advent of technology. I mean, from when you started to when you finished, I mean, there was a real jump in the things that we're able to do. So what were the things that you found to be really useful, and the things that maybe you picked up while working for the federal government that are some skill sets that you find very valuable today in what you're doing?
Sure. So no surprise that the FBI has always been kind of behind the curve with technology, at least the time I was there. I think now they're much more cutting edge than they were.
Right.
But, harking back to 9/11, and right after that happened, there were literally agents going home to fire up their AOL accounts to send pictures of the terrorists back and forth because they couldn't do it from their, very antiquated FBI systems.
Right.
But, and having said that, I mean, the FBI finally did get it right. They developed a system, a case management system that's very robust to this day. But it took a long time, and it was painful after 9/11 getting to that point. But, I've always had the feeling that, investigations are about being on the street, knocking on doors, talking to people, developing evidence, developing informants, talking to somebody who knows what's going on. So, technology is really important. It helps you kind of, as they say, connect the dots.
Right.
But it will never replace the human interaction that's required to develop a successful investigation.
Oh, I agree with you completely. So one of the things what I really championed for in the past, 4 years or so, is this thing I call electronic canvassing. And essentially it's the idea of doing that door knock, but electronically, because being in New York, things happen all over the place that people witness and they post about it and they say, oh my God, I just saw this thing happen. I can't believe, this person's just died or I hope they're okay or something like that. And it's on social media, and then they go on with their lives. And by the time the police arrive, nobody knows about them. They're gone.
Right.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that real life thing, because that, using the electronic canvassing is the foot in the door, right? If you find out who they are, now you actually have to contact them, and you have to have the social skills to interview somebody and ask them the right questions. So, the two really do go hand in hand. I think you're right. I don't think that good old door knock is ever going to be replaced by technology, but it's definitely, there's things out there that can help us do what we do.
There's no crime that ever gets committed that somebody doesn't know what happened.
Right.
It's just a matter of talking to enough people and getting to that right person who can say, hey, I kind of know what happened here.
Right.
And I'm willing to tell you.
Right. Right. So do you find a lot of the skills that you picked up working for the government as far as interviewing people are skills that you use today?
Oh, 100%. I mean, interviewing is the most important skill. I kind of got involved, and I was infatuated with sort of the school of interview and interrogation. One of my best friends in Detroit was the polygraph examiner there.
Sure.
And he was such a good interviewer. I mean, he was the type of guy that when he was interviewing, a criminal suspect, I don't know what the percentage was, but it's probably more than 50%. He never had to turn the machine on. Wow. He just had that ability to talk to somebody and sort of elicit that information. And it's just an invaluable skill. I was queried by somebody 2 days ago in the IT arena, wanted to know what she could do to make herself more valuable as a candidate, as a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer.
Right.
My recommendation was, don't talk about your technical skills. Talk about your ability to talk to people, write a report, work a big room, do a PowerPoint presentation, things like that.
Sure.
Those are skills that, really are undervalued today.
Yeah. I mean, folks that know how to use Excel spreadsheets are still very valuable, I think.
Right.
Or even those that know how to do WordPress and work on websites. There's real value behind that. And it's kind of plug and play, but if there are plenty of people that don't know how to do it. So it's always a challenge. We had Stephen Komorek from Conflict International on recently doing human lie detecting. And it was just, it's fascinating. That whole concept of not needing technology or a machine to really get a beat on somebody as to whether or not they're trying to deceive you regarding a particular topic. I thought was really, really interesting. So
it really is.
Yeah. Your company now, FCS Global Advisors, what type of services do you offer to your clients?
So this was sort of a reboot of what I was doing in 2012, 2013 when I first retired from the Bureau. I spun up a little company and was doing, kind of a high-end investigation, some financial crimes, deep background investigations, some death investigations. Interestingly enough, in 2 years, I did 3 death investigations, which I would never have predicted. But the previous company, sort of the sister company of FCS Global Advisors, is FCS First Coast Security, which is, a 2,500 person manned guarding operation.
Wow.
I brought my licenses and my PI license and things like that to that company. And we decided to kind of spin it off and reconstitute what I was doing. So we're looking at doing that, sort of the higher end investigations for clients, litigation support, due diligence for business decisions,
Right.
Deep background investigations for companies that are making a board hire or a university that wants to hire somebody for the board of regents and things like that. I think those skills are really underappreciated. I think that companies make big decisions without having a lot of information sometimes.
Right.
They work off of resumes or word of mouth without, if somebody told you they went to Duke University Law School, did they really?
Right.
It might be worth it to, have somebody go down and pull the records to University Law School and make sure they really went there. Or to knock on doors and talk to their neighbors or their former employment associates, things like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, even there is a lot of information online if you know where to look to verify all that stuff, but I'm sure it happens all the time. And I think one of the things that's really going to take off now is all the charities and things that have been created for the COVID-19. People wanting to, out of the goodness of their heart, get involved with a charity or donate or support a particular cause and not vetting and doing their due diligence on that particular charity. And being taken to the cleaners on it. I think you're going to see a lot of fraud going forward where, the proper vetting isn't being done on those particular nonprofit organizations.
And comparatively, it's really cheap to do it. I mean,
right.
It doesn't cost a lot to get sort of that little background check to make sure that what somebody says is true.
Sure.
Really is true.
Sure. And if we don't, we can always bring in Steve Komorik to do his lie detecting. We'll get to the bottom of it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going to jump out real quick for a commercial break for our sponsors and all that. And when we get back in, I want to really cover more of that transition, what that looked like, and some of the challenges that you faced when you were, getting out of that federal government job and going into the private sector. So sit tight, folks. We'll be right back.
PI Perspectives is brought to you by Scope Now. Have you tried Scope Now 3.0 yet? Make sure you visit their website and check out the webinar on TikTok investigations. There's some real cutting-edge research tips. Check out Rob Douglas's episode on our program last November to learn more about Scope Now 3.0 or visit scopenow.com. Sign up and use PIP20 for additional savings. TheInvestigatorstoolbox.com also sponsors this episode. Welcome to the future of networking and learning for private investigators. Watch for the official launch on June 1st, 2020. You can learn more at investigators-toolbox.com.
And welcome everybody back to PI Perspectives. We are here today with Jim Casey from FCS Global Advisors. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, so before we jumped out, we were talking about your journey of getting into the private sector, no longer working for Uncle Sam, and all of a sudden you got to start from the bottom and make your way up. So talk to me a little bit about your experience and how you got through it.
Sure. So, it really is interesting that a lot of great investigators, people who are really good at hitting the streets and knocking on doors and banging out interviews and putting together cases, if they don't have an appreciation for the business aspect of the business, it can be really detrimental to what they're trying to do. And it's a struggle for all of us who worked in a government sector where you don't worry about those things.
Right.
You show up to work, you do your job, and the paycheck comes every 2 weeks, and it's great. But if you don't understand those things, you really need to engage with somebody that can help you do it. A great accountant is invaluable. You can off some of that to them. One of the really interesting aspects when I was in the man guarding side of this company, it boiled down to, and it was an interesting dynamic, pretty much everything costs in that business $1 an hour. So we had, for example, contracts in Washington, D.C., about 700 officers that worked up there for DHS, Federal Protective Service, and such. So if I went up there to audit in Jacksonville some of our operations, everything I did when I went up there cost $1 an hour.
Right.
And what that means is, a round trip ticket to Washington, D.C. might be $500. That means some officer standing on post earning whatever his compensation, whatever we charge a client, $1 an hour is what it costs. 500 hours of that person standing on post is what it cost me to fly to Washington, D.C. If I stayed at a hotel, if I got a meal, if I had to take a taxi, everything was $1 an hour. It was a really interesting dynamic, and it allowed me to put that sort of cost into perspective that, everything you do in business has to be paid for. There's no overhead. There's no government overhead. There's no taxpayers that are sort of funding that operation. So, the profit margins can be thin, but you really got to work the business angle. Yeah.
It's a little more real when it's your own, right?
Yeah.
That was definitely a challenge I had when I started, and I'm the complete opposite, right? So I never had law enforcement. My background, it just didn't work out that way, and it's always so funny because the first thing people ask me when I meet them, and they're like, "Oh, where'd you retire from?" Like, yeah, nowhere yet.
School of hard knocks.
Yeah, exactly. But I know a lot of people, which is always good, right?
Yeah.
There's the challenge on that, and just learning how I think to be a business owner and an investigator, because you really have to wear both hats, right? You got to know how to market, you got to know how to service a client, and get repeat business, and you got to actually get the job done. And when you do start it, and if it's just you when you do start, you really got to do everything. So I always imagined that the access to data and information was something that was a big difference too, right? You've got Uncle Sam, you have the ability to have access to things. Now you don't, and you kind of got to fend for yourself. Is that like just a wives' tale, or is that something that's real?
No, it's real. The ability to walk into, a business, a bank, anywhere, and drop a subpoena,
right,
is huge. And in our business, you don't have that luxury. You can't walk into somebody and compel their testimony or show them some creds that say, FBI, I need to talk to you. That really puts people on the defensive.
Sure.
And gives you that sort of position of advantage to work the interview. You walk in and say, Jim Casey, private investigator. They're like, what do you want to know? Absolutely. It's a huge advantage to have that government infrastructure behind you, as opposed to trying to do this as a private investigator or private person just working with open source information.
Right. But it's not impossible, for us to do our job and get things done. You just got to be creative in how you do it. And,
exactly.
The information is there. You just need to know where to look for it. So that's been my experience. So, do you have a staff? And obviously you had staff for the security, but do you have investigators that work in-house as well, or is it just you?
So here's what I did a couple of years ago when I was in this business, and how we'll at least start it from now. There's kind of a self-infrastructure within the former FBI agent community. There's about 850 of us that are involved in private investigations, and we kind of bounce information off each other and bounce leads off each other.
That many, huh? That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So, it's huge. If I have a lead in San Diego, I don't have to kind of take a flyer on an investigator in San Diego I don't know. I might not personally know a former FBI agent out there, but I know his training. I know what his writing is going to be like. I know how we interview somebody. And he knows, by the way, best of all, that he's going to get paid, because a former agent engaged him is not going to screw him.
Right. Yeah. That's always important. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So it's almost like an 850 person investigative agency, kind of.
Wow. That's pretty neat. And I assume your experiences have been, all positive, and you haven't had any issues, right?
Not at all. In fact, a couple of years ago when I was doing this, I had a pretty complicated death investigation that a bank came to me from an individual who had a trust fund worth, I think it was about $12 or $15 million at the time, and they wanted us to help prove that he was dead so they could disperse the trust fund. Mm-hmm. And I had a former agent from Los Angeles running leads in Mexico, Colombia, Bolivia, Costa Rica, because he had, in his previous experience with the FBI, as a legat in those countries, and knowing former police officials the ability to kind of access, death records and police records and things like that. And so I was able to put this investigation together using that resource.
Right. And after you came out of the FBI, you actually didn't jump in right away with FCS. You had done some work with a national retailer also, right?
Yeah, I worked for myself for about 2 years. Had a lot of fun doing it. I had a sort of a backup gig as one of 5 former FBI guys that were working for the PGA Tour, doing security all around the country with the tour players and things like that.
Nice.
It was about 13 weeks a year. It was fun, but wasn't a full-time job. And I was recruited by a former agent in charge of the Detroit office when I had been up there to go to the national retailer Steinmart and run all of their security operations. Really heavy on the retail theft, shrink, that sort of issue. But what I tried to bring into that operation was higher level issues like, active shooter, like, abusive personnel in the stores, cyber. That was right around the time of the Target breach.
Sure.
And a lot of retailers, Steinmart included, was not, sort of looking at that issue about how they could be a victim of a huge cyber breach like that.
Right. Trying to be proactive and not reactive on it, right?
Exactly. Brought a lot of that to them. And then, the FCS opportunity came along because for years, when I first got to Jacksonville, one of the first individuals I met was a former NCIS agent who had started this company back in 2000 and put it together, and we became great friends. And he wanted me to come work for him and run operations, which I did for a couple of years before we decided to kind of branch this off and sort of vector over to what my real wheelhouse was, which is investigations and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a little bit of that retail investigation background because that's where I ended up. Right, I got kicked around in the beginning. And I worked for a retail company for like 3 years doing mystery shopping and loss prevention and pre-employment screenings. But man, that was such a proving ground for like honing my interviewing skills.
Right.
I really learned how to talk to people, and they teach you how to do, looking for detection and like lie detection and all the other stuff. And they have tests that you give, and it's a whole psychological thing back and forth. And when I left that company, what was really interesting is I got out of the field completely and I went into recruiting. And that was another great ground for me to learn how to interview people. Because think about it, I'm calling 200 people a day on resumes, interviewing them for 5 or 10 minutes, and then saying, okay, you're a good candidate, come in and meet with me. And then they'd come in and sit down with me for 15 or 20 minutes. And it was all tech related too, the company I worked for. So I really learned how to talk to people from person to person in these basic skills that you would think are not necessary. Like, oh, you're just a loss prevention. What's the big deal? There's no real prestige behind it. But it's like, hey, man, you can really learn the human psyche and how to talk to people through having that person to person interaction. So I always thought it was a cool field to be in.
Yeah, you get good at it fast, right?
Right. And then, they always say like whatever the person admits to as theft is like a quarter of what they actually took as well. So
Exactly.
that was fun too. I know before we got online, we said we were going to talk about the life after the FBI, but I want to dip in a little bit and talk about your experience because you were involved in some pretty high-end investigations in the FBI. So tell me a little bit about some of the cases that you worked on and how you were able to contribute to getting justice or doing what needed to be done.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate because I seemed to kind of be around things that happened, and it wasn't like I was really going looking for something that I would be really good at or would lend itself to great success. I was just kind of in the right place at the right time. I think a lot of cops and former agents will tell you that, at least if they're honest, they will.
Right.
The first case, I was a young agent in Detroit, and we put together what we called in the FBI a Group 1 undercover. Group 1 meant that it was longer than 6 months and it cost more than $100,000 to run. Probably more than that now, both in time and certainly in expense. But it was a really fascinating case at the time. It was the middle 90s, early to middle 90s, and we were running literally an import-export business for luxury cars, boats, high-end vehicles and things like that. And we had targeted a number of thieves, not just in the Detroit area, but we had people from Salt Lake City, Utah, California, Arizona that started bringing this stuff to us.
Wow.
It was a fascinating case. We wrapped up a number of individuals. Two of them ended up on America's Most Wanted. Probably recovered about $7 million in vehicles.
Wow.
The whole thing lasted a total of about 3 years, and it was just great fun to run that thing.
Right.
Probably one of the highlights of my time in Detroit, really.
So what were some of the challenges of seeing that through?
So, we had two undercovers that were full-time. And, in the Bureau, when you work undercover, it's not really like you see on TV where you just take off your uniform and, go undercover for an afternoon. It's really kind of a dedicated assignment where these guys, assume another personality. They don't go to the office. We have contact agents that work with them to make sure that psychologically they're okay.
Sure.
It was really very in-depth. The challenges of it were, quite frankly, one of the biggest challenges. We had so much success. We had three different individuals that had nothing to do with each other. They were bringing so much stuff to us. We had to kind of keep them separated so they didn't run into each other.
You don't want one agent shooting another agent by accident.
And we had to put some operations on hold where you normally would shut them down, arrest them, stop buying stuff from them. You had to kind of put them on hold so you can continue with a couple of the other subjects.
Wow.
So, it was really pretty interesting the way that worked out. But in the end, it all worked out, and everybody went to jail, and we had, pretty good success with eventually the individuals that disappeared with us became fugitives. America's Most Wanted literally helped capture both of them. So
wow.
it was a big success.
That's pretty cool. All right. So give me another one.
So one of the most interesting cocktail party stories I tell is my contribution to the Pan Am 103 case, which, folks remember in December of 1988, Pan Am 103 left London Heathrow, headed for New York, JFK, blew up over Lockerbie, Scotland, 288 passengers, some of them coming home for Christmas break, were all killed. How I got involved in that literally goes back to 2 years before that. In 1986, I'm a young diplomatic security agent in a small counterterrorism operations section. I go over to Lomé, Togo, country on the west coast of Africa, to do a minor investigation that really didn't seem to be related to anything. It was sort of a Libyan-backed insurrection, and the government back then, if you think about it, if you remember, the U.S. government had a big interest in Libya because of some terrorist activity that
Sure.
the Libyans were involved in and all that. So I went over there, and among a number of things that I recovered over there as part of a team was a pretty sophisticated timer. We put it in a diplomatic pouch, literally brought it back to the United States. It got swapped around between the Bob data center of the FBI and the CIA, and nobody really could figure out anything about it. Flash forward 2 years later, 1988, Pan Am 103 blows up. Flash forward a couple years later, about 1990, 91, 92. There's kind of a famous picture that was in Time magazine on the news of an FBI bomb data center agent who identified a small chip that had been embedded in part of the bomb of Pan Am 103, and they thought this thing was unique. They eventually married it up with the timer that I'd recovered 4 years earlier and discovered that it was the same. This came from the same batch of exactly 20 timers that had been built by a company in Switzerland for the Libyan intelligence service.
Wow.
And that went on to become one of the most critical pieces of evidence to prove that the Libyans, the two Libyan intelligence service officers, were responsible for planting that bomb on Pan Am 103 that blew it up. So pretty interesting case.
Yeah. I mean, listen, that's global investigating going on right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe a case or two for FCS that you thought was interesting, or maybe it turned out a little bit differently than you thought it would, or surprised you a bit?
Yeah, so I'll go back to sort of the company that became FCS Global Advisors. I talked about that death investigation we did, which was very interesting.
Right.
There was another investigation that we did that was a financial services company, a pretty good sized financial services company, came to us and said, we have a investment product that we've been providing to customers who are qualified to invest in this. It's a complicated product, but we're not sure that the product is legitimate. It seems that there's a problem with the company that's providing this product, with providing 1099s, with providing financial documents to the people who had invested in it. So, we did kind of a deep background on the individuals who started this company, found out they had other companies that kind of went bust, found out they were using mail drops as sort of the official address of the company, found out they were living in apartments that they had just moved into. Surprisingly, I got one of the principals of the company to agree to an interview, which was not beneficial to him because it became obvious that
that's the old Jedi mind trick from the FBI. Exactly. Congratulations.
Yeah, the whole thing was bogus. I mean, this company that was seemingly building like a medical product that was supposed to help with kidney disease or something like that. The whole thing was bogus. And so we were able to put together a pretty comprehensive report to the financial services company that was promoting this and saying, basically you need to take this to the FBI or the SEC because it's a scam.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about maybe some advice you can give some agents or people that are working in law enforcement that are thinking like, okay, I'm a year or two from retiring, or I just retired. What next? How do I start? What advice can you give them?
So my first bit of advice would be to start early. Don't wait till 2 weeks before you retire. When I was the agent in charge, I felt so bad about this. These guys, we had a mandatory retirement age in the FBI. You had to be, if you were 57, you're out. 57th birthday, goodbye. Thanks for your service.
Right.
And some guys just never really saw that coming. They didn't plan for it, and they would, come in and ask for extensions. And my advice is think about this. If you're on that sort of bubble where you're a drop or you're going to retire soon, do some talking to people who went before you. Get mentor with people. Talk to officers or agents who are in whatever field you're thinking about going to and get their advice. And the second thing is, sort of think about that business angle. Don't be cheap. Get a good accountant. Set up the proper licensing, set up the proper LLCs. All of those things are so critical to your success. You're not just going to be able to hang out a shingle and go knock on doors and bang out reports like you did when you were an officer or an agent. You have to have that infrastructure behind you.
Right.
So, take the time to do it. That's kind of my best advice.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, definitely network and, join state associations, national associations, anywhere where you can network with other investigators, even online. There's some great Facebook groups. If you know where they are and you can find them, they're good resources there to tap into. And consider being a subcontractor too, right? So you may have to work at a lesser rate, but you'll get the experience under your belt. And if you get steady work that's coming in, it's a good way to do what you have to do, so you can do what you want to do, right? That's always. Sometimes you got to take the jobs that aren't desirable to start off with. I know I did a lot of process serving when I started my business, and I hate process serving. But you do what you got to do. You got to pay the bills. So definitely. Oh,
you're 100% right. And the marketing, you can't overemphasize marketing. Yeah. I tell people it's not one thing. Say, well, I have a Facebook page or I have a LinkedIn account. That's great if you have that. But you have to have everything. You got to have a Twitter feed. You got to have podcasts. You have to have YouTube channels. You have to have Instagram. All of these things sort of feed. And don't get lost in that. It's not all about having social media.
Right.
But you have to work every angle and sort of bring it together as sort of a hub and spoke so that right in the middle is you, and all those things on the outside are those things that are helping you market your business.
Sure. And there's plenty of good marketing resources there. Actually, podcast episodes. There's a guy named Tanner Rutledge that does the Covert Investigator. He's got a real strong marketing background. That's a great podcast to listen to. The PI Magazine, the podcast, Jim and Nicole from PI Magazine, they have a lot of good networking tips, and they speak to a lot of really good people. And the other thing to remember about being a private investigator, you cannot do everything yourself. There are certain skills and trades that you're good at, and there's certain skills and trades that you're not good at. And, find the right person or the right company to help you service that account and make sure you get it done, but it doesn't necessarily have to be you doing that. And I think that's, it's better to be the boss and just kind of run things and funnel it through to to other resources that can get the job done for you sometimes than doing, tripping through an assignment to get it done, or maybe you don't have enough time to do it and you're not doing the job that you could do. So that's another piece of advice that I think we can throw out there as well.
Absolutely. It's about branding. It's about marketing.
Right.
It's about management.
Right.
You know, if you're doing a great job managing the business and branding the business, the rest of it will sort of fall together.
Yeah, and the investigative work will be there. We're all, if we're doing this, we kind of have a background to begin with it, and we're probably going to be pretty good at it. Unless you really don't want to work. If you decide you want to work, the work is there, and you'll be able to do it well. And we're all trained well. It's just knowing how to find it, how to service the account, and making sure everybody's happy on top of it. So Jim, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you if they have further questions, or maybe they retired from the FBI and they want to be in that network of 850 investigators?
So if they're retiring from the FBI and they don't know, it's called the trap line. It's a paper document only that they can get from the Ex-Agent Association, and I'm sure every former agent has access to that. But we're on social media. We have a website at fcsglobaladvisors.us. Jim Casey, I'm at Jim Casey with a hyphen in the middle, at Jim_Casey_, Instagram, same address.
Right.
My email address is jcasey@fcssecurity.us. So just Google me, it'll come up, and I'm happy to help anybody any way I can.
Yeah, that's great. And if you love all these FBI stories, there's a great podcast that's out there too. Jerry Williams, FBI Retired Case Files. That is a great show. She actually just had her 200th episode, I think, this week.
And if I can promote myself on that,
yeah,
I recently did a podcast with her on the first case I told you about, that undercover operation in Detroit.
Sure.
And that will post the 1st of June.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So look, we got a teaser here on my show. I got an exclusive. I don't know how Jerry's going to feel about that.
And I got to promote my buddy, Chris Graham, who that podcast just dropped today, I think.
Okay.
Who was the supervisor in charge of the Macmillan's case.
Oh, yes.
Yep. We talked Jacksonville.
We talked about that. Yeah. I was curious if you were involved in that during your time, but that's cool.
I was not. It predated me here. I worked with all those guys. They did a terrific job, and really they didn't get the credit they deserved initially, because that thing happened in August of 2001, like literally weeks before 9/11. So it dropped off the radar, but great case.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right. So we're just promoting everybody else's show here. So that's great. And and that's cool, because there's literally 24 hours in the day. So please check out the other shows, support the other shows.
Exactly.
We're all about, finding good content to listen to. So, hey, Jim, this was a great chatting with you. I was looking forward to this conversation, actually. I wasn't sure how we were going to do this technical wise to make it make sense here, but I think we did a good job here. I'm happy with the material. So, thanks again for reaching out to me and making this happen. So this was really neat.
Thank you for the opportunity, Matt. Look forward to listening to more of your great podcasts, and let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys on the next show. Take care.
Thanks for checking out the show today. Can you believe there are 850 retired FBI agents out there that are private investigators? Also, how cool is it that a little piece of technology and a timer was the start piece of evidence in the Lockerbie bombing? We also want to thank Crosstrack, Scope Now, and the investigatorstoolbox.com for sponsoring the show. Please, folks, check out their sites and consider using their services. Make sure you use code PIP20 for additional savings. Next week, Matt welcomes back Nick Himonitis to discuss Bitcoin investigations. Please be sure to give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and share the show with your friends. Now have a great week, stay safe, and thanks for tuning into PI Perspectives.